Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. This is the English translation of the Majlis of Hazrat Maulana Qamar Uzzaman Saheb Damat Barakatuhum, which took place on Tuesday, the 4th of Rabi'ul Akhir 1446, the 8th of October 2024. So here we have some waqi'at of ikhlas of our Buzurgan Deen. Allah Ta'ala give us all the tawfiq and the hidayat of making amal. In his Mathnawi, Hazrat Maulana Rum Rahimahullah relates a story of Hazrat Ali Radiyallahu Ta'ala an. While waging jihad on one occasion, he overpowered a non-Muslim, climbed on his chest and was about to finish him off with his sword. This disrespectful non-Muslim spat on his blessed face. Hazrat Ali Radiyallahu Ta'ala immediately cast his sword aside and got off his chest. The non-Muslim was astonished and asked him the reason for letting him go. He replied, "When you spat on my face, my nafs became inflamed and my noble character was becoming tainted. My fighting was now a little for Allah's sake and a little for my self-ego. And it is not permissible to include anyone or anything in Allah's worship. You are a creation of Allah and you belong to Him. You do not belong to me. Thus, I can only do what is permitted by Allah. You are created by Allah, and anything created by Him can only be destroyed by His order. A glass belonging to a friend can only be broken by a rock belonging to the friend." It was solely on the blessing of Hazrat Ali Radiyallahu Ta'ala and sincerity which enabled him to control his nafs. The blessing of his sincerity caused the non-Muslim to embrace Islam, who was then instrumental in many of his family members embracing Islam. This was the story of a senior Sahabi, in fact of Amirul Mu'mineen, leader of the believers. The books record many stories of many kings and rulers who possessed such distinguished character with which they could differentiate between lillahiyat and nafsaniyat, sincerity and self-ego. Our Hazrat Wala is saying, ikhlas bahut bari daulat, bahut bari ni'mat. It is a great bounty and boon, a great treasure from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ikhlas ki bari qadar Allah ke nazdeek. There is great appreciation for sincerity in the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, should we not keep the incidents of Sayyidina Abu Bakr, Sayyidina Umar, Sayyidina Ali, these great Sahaba in front of us, their ikhlas, etc.? Should we not keep it in front of us? Meyare ikar barseh ast. The foundation of our deen, of our shariat, of Islam is based upon three: Kitabullah, wa Sunnat Rasul, wa Sirat Salaf, the Quran, the Hadith, and it just doesn't stop there. If a person in the true sense wants to practice on Quran and Sunnah, he will not be able to do it without having the practical example of the pious predecessors, that how did they live, how did they practice on those ayat and those ahadith. So Hazrat Tanvi had compiled Amirul Riwayat, and there are many amazing, astonishing and incidents which would touch the heart. Hazrat Maulana Shah Wasiullah Sahab, this is his talks, and I am relating it to you. It is all from his Malfuzat. The book Akhlaq-e Muhsini relates the story of one of the Khalifs of Khurasan who issued an order of punishment against a certain criminal. The moment the people began lashing the criminal, The moment people began lashing the criminal, he began swearing and hurling verbal abuses at the Khalif. He issued an order to stop all punishment and freed him. One of the close associates of the Khalif said, Hazrath, now was the time to mete out more punishment against the same shameless criminal. What was the reason for pardoning and freeing him? The Khalif replied, I was disciplining him for Allah's sake. When he began swearing me and hurling abuses at me, my nafs changed and it was affected by what he said. I wanted to exact revenge from him, but I did not want to include my nafs in the matter of Allah. Let's just look at that. I did not want to include my nafs in the matter of Allah. This is very far from sincerity. When a person does a dini act and includes a worldly motive to it, he is deprived of its reward. His swearing and verbal abuses enraged me. Consequently, the deed which was for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala became tainted with my personal motives. Once the demand of the nafs becomes obvious, how can the deed remain sincere? It is better to give up the act in which there is no sincerity. In Ihya ul-Ulum, there is a waqia and story related of a Buzruk who would never engage in futile conversations. He was walking along a riverbank one day when he saw a boat approaching. The boat had large vats, these huge drums. So he asked the boat people, what is in the vats? They replied swiftly, the king's wine. You can do whatever you like. He said, what is in your hands? They replied, fighting sticks. He said, give them to me for a short while. They gave it to him, and he began using them to break the vats one after the other. He eventually broke 29 of the 30 vats and left one. The king was informed of this, and he summoned the Buzruk. It is said that he was a tyrant who used to sit on a steel throne with a steel axe in his hands. He asked the Buzruk, did you break the vats? He replied, yes. The king asked, who appointed you as a muhtasib, a kotwal, an inspector? Who appointed you? The Buzruk replied, the one who made you king. On hearing this, the king lowered his head for a while and asked him after some time, okay, tell me, what prompted you to do what you did? The Buzruk replied, nothing except desiring well-being. Nothing except desiring well-being for Amirul Mu'mineen. If I see a snake or a scorpion heading towards Amirul Mu'mineen, it is my compulsory duty to save him. Likewise, when I saw an item of wine heading towards Amirul Mu'mineen, which would cause him to be taken to task severely in the Akhirah, my desire for his well-being compelled me to save him from it. On hearing this, the king lowered his head and remained in thought for a long while. He then said, okay, tell me one thing. When you were intent on breaking them, why did you not break all of them? Why did you leave one? The Buzruk replied, now that you have asked me, I will have to tell you. As long as I was breaking the vats, my heart was in an excellent condition. I was filled with emotions of dislike for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, bughz fillah, and desiring good for a fellow Muslim. I was also overpowered by these emotions that if the entire world was filled with wine drums, I would have broken them all. But when I reached the 30th vat, my nafs, self-ego, got the better of me, and I thought to myself, you are so brave with regard to nahi anil munkar, prohibiting evil, that you do not even bother about the king of the time. No sooner this thought entered my heart, I realized that my nafsaniyat, my self-ego has come in, and lillahiyat, doing something solely for Allah's pleasure, has departed, and so I did not break the last vet. The king was very much affected by the Buzruk's speech and said, very well, I am appointing you as an inspector from today. The Buzruk replied, excuse me, but I cannot accept this position, because if you appoint me to it today, you can remove me from it tomorrow. I do not need it. Saying this, he departed from there and never came to the city for as long as the king was alive. Dekha aapne? Did you see? By virtue of their sincerity, the pious elders and close friends of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala develop a special condition in their hearts through which they can differentiate between nafsaniyat and lillahiyat. I say, since it is necessary to acquire sincerity and compulsory to safeguard one's nafs from nafsaniyat, it becomes necessary on every Muslim to understand the difference and develop this capability in his heart. This was and has always been the modus operandi of the Buzrugan-e-Din. They speak about sincerity and they try to develop this quality in their associates. You too will not deny the need for it, because you saw how the fearless worshipper mentioned in the beginning had no dearth for good deeds, but what he really lacked was sincerity. What he really lacked was sincerity. Listen further. Maulvi Abdul Karim Saheb Kumthalwi related a story of Hazrat Maulana Ashraf Ali Thanvi rahimahullah. He was about to journey to Delhi. So he said, carry some clothes and we shall change them when we reach there. The clothes which I am wearing will suffice for the journey. The Mauli Sahib relates that Hazrat did not change his clothes even after reaching Delhi. He delivered his stock in the same clothes. Hazrat may have had some thoughts on ostentation and pride, and this is why he did not change them. That is why he did not change them. Now listen to another incident in Waqi'ah. Hazrat Maulana Thanvi rahimahullah invited Hazrat Maulana Shaykhul Hind Mahmudul Hasan Deobandi rahimahullah to Kanpur on one occasion. When he arrived, Hazrat Shaykhul Hind rahimahullah was requested to deliver a talk. Hazrat accepted and delivered an excellent speech. Many of those who were experts in rational sciences, mantiq, were left astounded by the level of the speech. While delivering the speech, Maulvi Lutfullah Saheb, Aligarhi, arrived. Hazrat concluded his speech immediately. The people were saddened by this because they felt it was an ideal opportunity for Hazrat to continue speaking in the presence of this Mauli Sahib, who was an accepted authority in the rational sciences. Hazrat Rahimahullah's speech was in itself on a very high intellectual level, and had he continued, Mauli Sahib would have heard something in this regard. Someone plucked up the courage and conveyed this message to Hazrat Deobandi Shaykhul Hind Rahimahullah. He said, in no uncertain terms, brother, the thought occurred to me as well, but I ended my speech because it would no longer be for Allah's pleasure. Now you may have gauged from these waqi'at to what an extent these pious people focus their attention on their nafs. Instead of saying things to others, they were concerned about taking stock of their own selves. अपने माइब सामने आ जाते हैं तो फिर दूसरों की तहकीर कल्ब से निकल जाती है. Now, I conclude by summarizing whatever I had said. Man ought to look at his own faults. It is most detestable to look down on others and to look at them with derision. As long as a person does not look at his own faults, he will look at the faults of others. No sooner he examines his own faults, the derision which he feels for others will depart from his heart. Now Hazrat Khaja Azizul Hasan Madzub rahimahullah states, औरों पर मुअतरिज़ थे, लेकिन जब आंख खोली अपने ही दिल को हमने गंजे अयूब पाया. I was criticizing others, but no sooner I opened my eyes, I found my heart to be densely filled with faults and defects. Hazrat Maulana Mohammad Ahmad Saheb conveys the same theme in his couplets, saying, खुल गई जब से चश्मे बसीरत, खुल गई जब से चश्मे बसीरत, अपनी नजरों से खुद गिर गए हम. I was criticizing others. The moment I opened my eyes, my position and rank fell down before me. Now the sinner who is ashamed of his sins is fearful of Allah Ta'ala's punishment and hopeful of his forgiveness. He is better than the fearless worshipper who relies on his ibadat. The sinful servant who is fearful of Allah's punishment is better than the worshipper who is ostentatious in his worship. This is the meaning of the Buzrug's statement. Al-Asi khayrum min al-mudda'i. Al-Asi khayrum min al-mudda'i. A sinner is better than a person who claims piety. The pious could not traverse the path safely because of his pride and arrogance. The pious person, the person who had lost the way, entered Darus Salam. He lost the path, but he entered Darus Salam, Jannah, by virtue of his servitude and his submission. So, the essential way is the way of tawazu and humility. This was the sunnah of every prophet and the practice of the righteous of every error. We explained this point in the commentary to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's dua, Anal Ba'isul Faqir. Now, Hazrat Maulana Shah Wasiullah Sahab, this is his malfuzat. With much great passion, he would relate this to us. बहुत शद्द मस्त के साथ बयान करते थे. Now, what we need to do, that these waqi'at, etc., and this ajizi, this expression of humility and helplessness in the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we should always keep that in front of us. رَبَّنَا تَقَبَّلْ مِنَّا إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ وَتُبْ عَلَيْنَا إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ التَّوَّابُ الرَّحِيمُ بِحُرْمَةِ سَيِّدِ النَّبِيِّ الْكَرِيمِ صلى الله عليه وسلم.